with a reluctant signature on unfamiliar ownership papers and a 3-day deadline to clean out the remote roadside motel she'd just inherited. Sarah Mitchell unwittingly stepped into a decades-old government conspiracy that would shatter everything she believed about American history. For hidden within the manager's office vault of the forgotten Desert Horizons Motel lay classified documents from a covert CIA operation that powerful intelligence officials had spent 50 years ensuring would never see the light of day before. We jump back in. Tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert wind howled against the windshield as Sarah Mitchell navigated the lonely stretch of highway cutting through the Nevada badlands. Tumbleweeds occasionally bounced across the cracked asphalt, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the desolate landscape. The GPS signal had disappeared 20 minutes ago, leaving her with only the lawyer's hastily scrawled directions to guide her toward what was apparently now her property. Single motherhood had taught Sarah to expect the unexpected, but inheriting a motel from an uncle she'd barely known certainly hadn't been on her bingo card for this month. Between her job as a digital security consultant, raising 14-year-old Emma alone, and the perpetual mountain of bills that seemed to multiply each month, she'd carved out exactly 3 days to deal with this inheritance before real life demanded her return. "Are we seriously almost there?" Emma asked from the passenger seat, not looking up from her phone. "There's like nothing out here." "According to the directions, it should be just around this bend," Sarah replied, squinting at the horizon where the highway seemed to disappear into the copper-colored desert. As they rounded the curve, Desert Horizons Motel materialized like a mirage, its once bright neon sign now a skeletal reminder of busier days. The single-story, L-shaped building looked like it belonged in another era, the 1960s. Specifically, when this stretch of Route 71 had been the main thoroughfare before. The interstate was built 30 miles north. "You've reached your destination," Sarah muttered, mimicking a GPS voice. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere." Emma finally looked up, her expression a perfect teenage blend of horror and fascination. "This is ours? Like for real?" "Technically. Yes, practically, we're selling it as soon as possible." Sarah pulled into the gravel parking lot, tires crunching over decades of desert dust. "Uncle Richard left it to me for reasons I still don't understand." The motel sat eerily silent, a row of 12 rooms with faded turquoise doors stretching along the front, the manager's office anchoring one end. A swimming pool, long since drained, formed a concrete depression behind the building. Despite its state of disrepair, there was something oddly preserved about the place, as if time had simply stopped here when the interstate diverted traffic away decades ago. "I didn't even know you had an Uncle Richard," Emma said, gathering her backpack as they parked in front of the office. "That makes 2 of us," Sarah replied. "Mom mentioned him maybe twice my entire childhood. Some kind of falling out with the family before I was born. He was her half-brother, lived out here, managing this place for almost 50 years. The call from the lawyer 3 days ago had been surprisingly brief. Your Uncle Richard Mitchell has passed away. Despite your minimal contact, he's named you sole beneficiary of his estate, which includes the Desert Horizons Motel and its contents. The property requires immediate attention." When Sarah had asked why her, of all people, the lawyer had simply said, "Mr. Mitchell's instructions were quite specific. He said you'd understand when you arrived." But standing now in the dusty parking lot, understanding felt very far away. Sarah retrieved the keys from the lockbox the lawyer had described, the metal hot from baking in the desert sun. "According to Mr. Gonzalez, the electricity and water are still connected. Basic utilities were maintained through a trust Richard set up. Weird that he'd pay to keep utilities on in an abandoned motel," Emma observed, showing more perception than most 14-year-olds. Just another item for the growing list of things that don't make sense about this situation. Sarah agreed, approaching the office door. The key turned with surprising ease in the lock, and the door swung open with a creak that seemed straight out of a horror movie. Emma grabbed her mother's arm. "Tell me again why we couldn't just let the lawyer handle this," she whispered. "Because according to the will, I need to personally inspect the property and contents before any decisions are made," Sarah replied, stepping inside. "Besides, the lawyer said there might be items of significant personal value that I'd want to claim before liquidating the estate." The smell hit them first: dust, old paper, and something else. Something chemical that Sarah couldn't quite identify. She fumbled for a light switch, surprised when the overhead fluorescence flickered to life, illuminating a perfectly preserved slice of Cold War Americana. The office looked like a museum exhibit: wood-paneled walls, a vintage reception, desk with a rotary phone, metal filing cabinets, and a wall of mailboxes for rooms that hadn't hosted guests in decades. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise undisturbed, as if Uncle Richard had simply stepped out for lunch rather than passed away after a lengthy illness in a Veterans Affairs hospital 50 miles away. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "This is seriously creepy," Emma said, trailing her finger through the dust on the counter. "It's like a time capsule." 3 days isn't going to cut it," Sarah sighed, surveying the office. "There's no way we can sort through everything and prepare it for sale that quickly. The rational choice would be to call the lawyer immediately, explain this was far more complicated than she'd anticipated, and hire professionals to clear the place out. But something held her there: curiosity about the uncle she'd never known, questions about why he'd left this peculiar property to her specifically, and perhaps a nagging sense that there was more to discover here than just dusty furniture and outdated decor. "Let's at least look around before we make any decisions," Sarah suggested, already moving deeper into the office. Behind the reception desk, a door led to what appeared to be Richard's living quarters, a small apartment with a kitchenette, bedroom, and bathroom. Like the office, everything was frozen in time, preserved in a layer of dust but otherwise untouched. The bookshelves lining one wall caught Sarah's attention: dozens of volumes on history, particularly Cold War history, international relations, cryptography, and Russian language texts. "Your uncle was really into spy stuff," Emma observed, examining the books. "These are all about the Cold War and secret codes and stuff. He was a Vietnam veteran," Sarah recalled one of the few details her mother had shared. "Maybe he developed an interest in military history after his service." As daylight faded and the desert quickly cooled, Sarah and Emma settled into the apartment for the night. They found clean linens in a closet and made up the bed and sofa, avoided using the ancient refrigerator in favor of the cooler of supplies they brought, and tried to ignore the peculiar feeling of being watched in this isolated outpost. After Emma fell asleep, Sarah found herself drawn back to the office, flashlight in hand, curious about what kind of records her uncle might have kept. The filing cabinets yielded mostly mundane documents: utility bills, supplier invoices, tax records for a business that had clearly operated on minimal revenue for decades. But one cabinet, positioned slightly apart from the others, was locked. Sarah tried the key she'd been given, but none fit. She was about to give up when her flashlight beam caught something unusual: a small framed photograph on the wall behind the reception desk. It showed a much younger Richard in army fatigues, standing beside a military jeep, the Vietnamese jungle visible in the background. Nothing unusual for a Vietnam veteran, except for the curious way the frame hung slightly askew, different from the other perfectly aligned items in the meticulously kept office. Moving closer, Sarah carefully removed the frame from the wall. Behind it was a small, shallow recess carved into the wood paneling. Inside sat a single key, old-fashioned and heavy, with an unusual pattern etched into its surface. Her heart suddenly racing, Sarah tried the key in the locked filing cabinet. It turned with a satisfying click, and the drawer slid open smoothly. Inside was a single folder labeled with an unfamiliar acronym, MKULTR, a blackbird. Opening the folder, Sarah found a typed letter addressed to her. "Sarah, if you're reading this, I've finally passed on, and you found the key exactly where I left it for you. You're probably wondering why I've left Desert Horizons to a niece I've never met. The truth is, your mother wasn't just estranged from me because of some trivial family disagreement, as she may have told you. She left because she discovered something about my work, my real work, that frightened her. She fled to protect herself, and later, to protect you. This motel was never just a motel. From 1964 to 1978, it served as a black site for certain classified government operations that officially never existed. What happened here affected thousands of lives, including your mother's and potentially yours. The evidence is hidden where they would never think to look. Find the vault. The combination is your birthday. They wouldn't know that connection existed. Be careful who you trust. They're still watching the property. Richard." Sarah's hands trembled as she lowered the letter. Her mother had died 5 years ago after a long battle with early-onset dementia, taking whatever secrets she knew to her grave. Now her mysterious uncle was suggesting that this abandoned motel in the middle of nowhere had been some kind of government facility, and that her mother's estrangement had been about more than a simple family disagreement. "Find the vault," she whispered to herself, glancing around the office with new eyes. Where would someone hide a vault in a place like this? She began methodically tapping walls, checking for hollow sounds, examining the floor for irregularities. After nearly an hour of searching, she noticed something odd about the vintage area rug beneath the desk. Unlike everything else in the office, it showed signs of recent movement. The dust pattern was different, disturbed. Sarah rolled back the rug to reveal a square outline in the floorboards. Her fingers found a small, nearly invisible metal ring recessed into one edge. When she pulled, a trapdoor lifted, revealing a steep set of metal stairs descending into darkness. Using her flashlight, Sarah carefully made her way down the stairs into what appeared to be a small bunker beneath the office. At the far end stood a heavy metal door with a combination dial. A proper vault, just as Richard's letter had mentioned. With trembling fingers, she entered her birthday, month, day, year, and held her breath. The lock clicked open. Inside the vault, metal shelving lined the walls, holding dozens of document boxes, film canisters, and what looked like medical files, all bearing government classification stamps and the same acronym from the folder. MKULTR Blackbird. A small desk sat in the center, a vintage tape recorder placed precisely in the middle. Sarah picked up the tape recorder, noticing it had been left ready to play, a tape already loaded. She pressed the button, and her uncle's voice filled the underground room. "Sarah, if you're hearing this, you've found the vault. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. From 1964 to 1978, I worked as an on-site supervisor for a classified CIA program operating under the umbrella of Project MKULTR. Officially, Desert Horizons Motel was a convenient stopover for travelers. Unofficially, it was Station 12, a black site where the agency conducted some of its most controversial experiments in the field of psychological operations. Dozens of American citizens were brought here under various pretexts and subjected to tests involving experimental drugs, hypnosis, and early psychological conditioning techniques. Many were simply travelers who checked in for a night's stay and were chosen at random. Others were specifically targeted because of their connections to individuals of interest to the government. Your mother discovered this by accident in 1979. When she came to visit me, she found documents I should have secured better. When she confronted me, I made the mistake of confirming everything in an attempt to justify my actions. She left that night and cut off all contact. What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't tell her, was that I had been collecting evidence for years, documenting every unethical operation conducted here with the intention of eventually exposing it all. But the agency had eyes everywhere, and going public would have meant signing my own death warrant. So I waited, maintained my cover as the simple motel manager, and kept this place operating long after it made any business sense to do so. The evidence in this room implicates former CIA directors, 2 former secretaries of defense, and numerous officials still in positions of power today. Some of the test subjects never recovered from what was done to them here. Others died, their deaths disguised as accidents or natural causes. Your mother was right to run, Sarah, because there's something else I discovered in 1979, something I've never told another soul. Some of the subjects brought to Desert Horizons were pregnant women. The agency was interested in whether psychological conditioning could affect unborn children, creating what they called pre-programmed assets who could be activated years later. Your mother was one of those women, Sarah, before she knew she was pregnant with you. The tape clicked off, leaving Sarah standing in stunned silence, the implications of her uncle's final revelation echoing in her mind. If what Richard claimed was true, she had been an unwitting subject of CIA experiments before she was even born, and powerful people would want that information to remain buried forever. As if in answer to her thoughts, a sound from above made her freeze. The unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel in the parking lot. Someone had arrived at the Desert Horizons Motel, and Sarah somehow knew it wasn't a lost traveler looking for directions. She quickly gathered Richard's letter and several files that looked particularly important, tucking them into her shirt. As she closed the vault and hurried up the stairs, she could hear car doors slamming and footsteps approaching the office. Sarah barely had time to replace the rug over the trapdoor before the office door swung open. 2 men in dark suits stood. In the doorway, their expressions impossible to read in the shadowy light. The taller one spoke first. "Miss Mitchell? We're with the government. We understand you've recently inherited this property. We need to discuss some classified matters related to its former operations." Heart pounding, Sarah straightened up, mind racing to process everything she'd just learned while formulating a response that wouldn't reveal she knew anything at all. Whatever secrets lay in the vault beneath her feet, she now understood why. Her uncle had chosen her specifically to inherit them, and the responsibility that came with that inheritance. "I'm afraid you've caught me at a disadvantage," she replied, summoning her professional voice, the one she used with difficult clients. "I didn't realize this property was of interest to the government." The shorter man stepped forward. "There are certain historical matters associated with this location that remain sensitive to national security. We're here to ensure a smooth transition of ownership that respects those sensitivities." As the men moved further into the office, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. They were wearing latex gloves, the kind that wouldn't leave fingerprints. These weren't ordinary government representatives coming to discuss paperwork. Whatever her Uncle Richard had hidden in the vault, it was clearly worth killing for. And now Sarah had to find a way to protect herself, her daughter sleeping just rooms away, and the explosive truth buried beneath the Desert Horizons Motel, a truth that had already cost her mother her peace of mind, and possibly her uncle his life. "Perhaps you gentlemen could come back tomorrow after I've had a chance to review the property properly," Sarah suggested, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's been a long drive and I wasn't expecting visitors. I'm afraid this matter requires immediate attention, Miss Mitchell," the taller man replied, his hand moving subtly toward his jacket. "Particularly given your background in digital security. We have reason to believe your uncle may have left certain sensitive materials in your possession." The mention of her profession sent a chill through Sarah. They'd done their homework on her, which meant this wasn't a routine visit. These men knew exactly who she was and why she might be dangerous to whatever they were protecting. "My uncle left me a rundown motel," Sarah said carefully. "I haven't found anything else of significance." The shorter man's smile didn't reach. His eyes, "Then you won't mind if we have a look around?" "For national security purposes." Before Sarah could respond, a voice came from the doorway to the apartment. "Mom? What's going on?" Emma stood there, sleepy-eyed and confused, looking between her mother and the two strangers. The men exchanged glances, and Sarah saw something dangerous flash in their eyes. Calculation, recalibration. The presence of a child complicated things. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart," Sarah said, managing to keep her voice calm despite the terror gripping her. "These gentlemen were just leaving. They came to the wrong address." The taller man's expression hardened. "Ms. Mitchell, I strongly advise cooperation in this matter, for everyone's safety." The threat was unmistakable. In that moment, Sarah understood what her uncle had spent decades preparing for, and why. He'd chosen her specifically as his heir. As a digital security specialist, she knew how to protect information, how systems could be compromised, and most importantly, how information could be leveraged as protection. "Emma, get your phone," Sarah said calmly, never taking her eyes off the men. "Call Mr. Gonzalez, the lawyer. His number is in my contacts." "That won't be necessary," the shorter man said quickly. "We can resolve this privately." Sarah's mind raced through options. These men clearly weren't expecting witnesses or complications. They had come expecting to find a confused inheritor who knew nothing about the property's history, someone they could easily intimidate or silence if necessary. Instead, they had found Sarah, and now Emma, a complication they hadn't anticipated. "I think you'll find it is necessary," Sarah replied, an idea forming. "You see, I've already found my uncle's records. Quite thorough, weren't they? Names, dates, subjects, results, all documented meticulously. Richard was nothing if not detail-oriented." The men tensed visibly, and Sarah knew she'd struck a nerve. "But the most interesting thing," she continued, improvising rapidly, "is that he didn't just keep those records here. As someone who understood information security, he distributed copies. Digital copies, accessible via deadman switches set to release if anything happens to me or my daughter." It was a bluff. Sarah hadn't had time to review any of the files in detail, let alone distribute them. But it was a bluff based on exactly what she would have done in Richard's position. And from the books on his shelves, her uncle had been well versed in information security concepts. "You're lying," the taller man said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" My uncle had 50 years to prepare for this moment. 50 years to ensure that if anything happened to him, or to me, everything would be exposed. Sarah moved to stand between the men and Emma. "Now I suggest you leave before my daughter finishes that call, and we can arrange a more official discussion about the history of this property through proper channels." The men exchanged looks again, clearly reassessing their approach. Whatever they had planned for tonight, Sarah's claim of distributed evidence had thrown a wrench into it. "This isn't over, Ms. Mitchell," the taller man said finally. "We'll be in touch through official channels, as you suggest." "I look forward to it," Sarah replied, maintaining her composure until the men backed out of the office and returned to their unmarked black sedan. Only when the sound of their engine had faded into the distance did Sarah allow herself to breathe, pulling Emma into a tight hug. "Mom, who are those guys? What's going on?" Emma asked, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "I'm not entirely sure yet," Sarah answered truthfully. "But I think Uncle Richard left us something a lot more complicated than just a motel." As the desert night closed in around the isolated building, Sarah Mitchell realized that what had begun as a simple property inheritance had become something far more dangerous and important. Whatever secrets lay in the vault beneath the Desert Horizons Motel, They were now her responsibility, a legacy that powerful people had spent decades trying to keep buried. And somehow, she needed to find a way to protect those secrets, understand their significance, and determine what to do with the explosive truth her uncle had entrusted to her, all while keeping herself and Emma safe from people who had already demonstrated they would go to extreme lengths to maintain their cover-up. The inheritance she had reluctantly accepted just days ago had become a mission she never asked for but couldn't ignore. For within those classified files lay the truth about government operations that had affected countless lives, including, possibly, her own. Sarah wasted no time gathering the most crucial files from the vault. With trembling hands, she selected documents with the highest classification levels, focusing on those mentioning Blackbird and any materials referencing pregnant subjects. Each folder she opened revealed more disturbing details about experiments conducted under the seemingly innocent roof of Desert Horizons Motel. "We need to leave," she told Emma, who was hurriedly packing their overnight bags. "Those men will be back, probably with reinforcements." "Who were they, Mom, really?" Emma asked, her teenage bravado failing to mask her fear. Sarah hesitated, weighing how much to tell her daughter. "They're government agents of some kind, but not the kind that play by the rules. Uncle Richard left us information they desperately want to keep secret." The digital security specialist in Sarah knew they needed to document everything immediately. She pulled out her phone and began photographing key documents, focusing on signatures, official stamps, and anything that showed chains of command. If something happened to the original files, at least digital evidence would remain. "Why would Uncle Richard get us involved in something dangerous?" Emma asked, zipping her backpack closed. "I don't think he had a choice," Sarah replied, still processing Richard's recorded message. "And I think it involves us more directly than I initially realized." The Nevada desert at night was pitch black, the kind of darkness city dwellers rarely experience. Sarah guided their car away from the motel without headlights until they were a safe distance down the highway, the bundle of classified documents secure in her laptop bag. Her mind raced with fragments from the files she'd barely had time to scan, code names, experiment protocols, lists of subjects identified only by numbers. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as Sarah finally switched on the headlights, illuminating the empty highway stretching before them. "Not home," Sarah said firmly. "They'll be watching our apartment. We need somewhere off the grid to figure this out." She thought quickly, evaluating options. "Remember Mr. Levinson? My client with the cabin near Lake Tahoe?" Emma nodded. "The paranoid tech guy who wanted you to build him a communication system that couldn't be tracked?" "He prefers privacy conscious," Sarah corrected with a slight smile. "But yes, he owes me a favor and his place is about 4 hours from here. No internet, no cell service, and most importantly, no connection to us that anyone could easily trace." As they drove through the night, Sarah couldn't shake the image of those men in dark suits, their clinical detachment when they realized a child was present. These weren't bureaucrats concerned about paperwork. These were people accustomed to making problems disappear. "Emma, I need you to understand something," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "What's happening is serious. Those men are dangerous, and they believe we have information that could damage very powerful people." "Do we?" Emma asked simply. Sarah nodded. "I think we do. Uncle Richard spent decades collecting evidence about a CIA program that used unwitting American citizens as test subjects for psychological experiments. From what little I've seen, some of those experiments resulted in deaths that were covered up." She paused, unsure whether to share the most personal revelation. But Emma deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as Sarah understood. "The files suggest your grandmother, my mother, was one of those subjects, while she was pregnant with me." Emma's eyes widened. "So you were experimented on before you were born? That's messed up." "If the files are accurate." "Yes," Sarah agreed. which might explain why these people are so determined to recover this information. It's not just historical wrongdoing. Some of the people involved could still be in positions of power today. The realization struck Sarah with new clarity. This wasn't just about covering up past mistakes. The techniques developed at places like Desert Horizons might still be in active use, potentially evolved into more sophisticated methods of psychological manipulation. And if Emma's grandmother had been a subject, what might that mean for genetic impacts across generations? Dawn was breaking as they reached the turnoff for Lake Tahoe, following a winding forest road to a secluded cabin nestled among towering pines. Mr. Levinson, true to his paranoid reputation, had installed a sophisticated security system that alerted him to their arrival before they'd even parked. "Sarah Mitchell," he greeted them at the door, a tall man with wild gray hair and penetrating eyes. "Your message said it was urgent." "It is," Sarah confirmed. "We need somewhere off the grid for a few days. I can explain, but first I need your word this stays between us." Levinson studied her face. "You look like you've seen ghosts." "Come in." The cabin was spacious but sparse, solar-powered, with its own well, and furnished with only the essentials. The main living area was dominated by an old wooden table where Levinson had arranged various radio equipment. "Ham radio," he explained, noticing Emma's curious glance. "Still the most reliable communication method when everything else fails." Once Emma was settled in a guest room, catching up on missed sleep, Sarah spread the stolen files across Levinson's table. The retired tech executive whistled softly as she explained her inheritance and the events of the past 24 hours. "McUltra," he murmured, examining a document header. That program was partially exposed in the church committee hearings in the 70s, but the CIA admitted they destroyed most records before investigators could see them. "If these are authentic, you're holding documents that officially don't exist anymore." Sarah pointed to the Blackbird designation. "This seems to have been a specific operation within the larger program. From what I can gather, it focused on prenatal and early childhood conditioning. They believed they could create some kind of psychological sleeper agents by exposing fetuses to certain chemical compounds, then implanting triggering mechanisms that could be activated decades later." Levinson's expression darkened. "And your mother was part of this?" Sarah nodded, showing him the file she'd found with her mother's maiden name. "According to this, she was Subject 37A. They administered compounds to her during her first trimester, disguised as prenatal vitamins, during what she thought was a routine check-in at a roadside motel during a trip across Nevada in 1979. "That fits the McUltra methodology," Levinson confirmed. "They often used unwitting subjects in seemingly mundane settings. Hotels, hospitals, college campuses, anywhere they could observe reactions without raising suspicions." He paused. "And you believe your uncle was involved?" "He was the on-site supervisor," Sarah said quietly. "But according to his message, he was gathering evidence to eventually expose it all. That's why he maintained the motel all these years, to preserve the evidence and keep the site under his control." Levinson adjusted his glasses, examining a particular document more closely. "These signatures. I recognize some of these names. This one was Deputy Director of Operations until just a few years ago. And this one still sits on the National Security Council." Sarah felt a chill. "Which explains why they're so desperate to recover these files. What's your plan?" Levinson asked directly. It was the question Sarah had been asking herself since fleeing the motel. "I don't know yet. Going public seems dangerous. They'd discredit the files as forgeries, discredit me as unstable, maybe worse. Going to law enforcement seems equally risky given the names involved. These people have had 50 years to perfect their cover-up." Levinson considered this. "You need leverage and protection. Information this explosive is both a danger and a shield. That's why I bluffed about having distributed copies," Sarah explained. "It bought us time, but they'll figure out soon enough that I was lying. Then we need to make it not a lie, Levinson said simply. My background is in data security. We need to create deadman switches, encrypted files stored on secure servers that will automatically release if you don't check in regularly. For the next several hours, they worked together to digitize and encrypt the most damning documents. Using Levinson's satellite connection, bounced through multiple proxies, they uploaded encrypted files to servers in different countries, each requiring a unique password that only Sarah would know. This buys you protection, Levinson explained as they finished. If anything happens to you or Emma, these files go public automatically, but it's only a defensive measure. You still need to decide what to do with the information. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes. First, I need to understand exactly what they did to my mother and potentially to me. There's a file mentioned repeatedly that I haven't found yet, something called Monarch Protocol. It seems to detail the actual conditioning, techniques, and activation triggers. If that's still at the motel, retrieving it will be dangerous, Levinson warned. They're almost certainly watching the place now. I know, Sarah agreed. But there's someone who might be able to help us understand what we already have. She pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly in the files, Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a research psychologist who had worked on the Blackbird project as a junior scientist. According to personnel files, Dr. Chun had left the program in 1975, her departure marked as resignation under protest. If she opposed what was happening, she might be willing to help us, Sarah reasoned. And according to these records, she's still alive teaching at Berkeley. Levinson looked skeptical. Approaching anyone connected to the program is risky. She could alert them immediately. It's a calculated risk, Sarah acknowledged. But we need someone who understands what these files actually mean. The technical language is beyond me, and the implications for Emma and me are too important to guess at. The mention of Emma made Levinson's expression soften. The generational aspects of this are what concern me most. If they were experimenting with prenatal conditioning, and your mother was a subject while pregnant with you, then whatever they did might have affected me, Sarah finished. And potentially Emma too, if the effects can be inherited. The weight of this possibility hung heavy in the room. Sarah had always prided herself on being in control of her life, raising Emma alone after her husband's death, building her consulting business from scratch, making rational decisions based on facts and logic. Now she was faced with the unsettling possibility that aspects of her own psychology might have been influenced before she was even born. While Emma continued sleeping, exhausted from their overnight flight, Sarah and Levinson developed a plan. They would approach Dr. Chun carefully, using the documents as proof of their knowledge, but without revealing Sarah's personal connection initially. If Chun seemed trustworthy, they would explain the full situation. There's something else we should consider, Levinson said gravely. The men who confronted you, they'll be running traces on you now, looking for connections, vulnerabilities, pressure points. Emma is my only real vulnerability, Sarah said. My parents are gone, I don't have siblings, and my ex-husband's family has never been involved in our lives. Then Emma needs to be somewhere completely secure while you approach Chun, Levinson decided. I have a colleague, former NSA, became disillusioned with government overreach. She runs a safe house network for whistleblowers. Emma would be completely off the grid there. Sarah felt a pang at the thought of separation from her daughter during such a crisis, but Levinson was right. Emma's safety had to be the priority. When her daughter finally awoke, Sarah explained as gently as possible what they were facing. So I need to go hide while you track down this doctor lady? Emma summarized, her expression a mix of fear and indignation. Just temporarily, Sarah. Promised. Mr. Levinson's friend will keep you safe while I figure out exactly what we're dealing with. And what if something happens to you? Emma asked directly, voicing the fear that hung unspoken between them. Sarah took her daughter's hands. "That's not going to happen, but just in case, I've set up protocols. If I don't check in every 24 hours using our special phrase, Mr. Levinson will implement a plan to get you to your Aunt Jessica in Canada." Emma's eyes widened. "I barely know Aunt Jessica." "Which is exactly why they won't connect her to us immediately," Sarah explained. "She's my college roommate, not a blood relative. There's no obvious link for them to trace." After a tearful goodbye, Levinson's colleague, a stone-faced woman, who introduced herself only as Marine, arrived to transport Emma to a secure location. Sarah watched the unmarked car disappear down the forest road, fighting the instinct to call them back, to keep her daughter close where she could protect her personally. "She'll be safer there than anywhere else," Levinson assured her. "Marin's network has been operating for years without a single compromise." With Emma secured, Sarah turned her attention to the next phase of their plan. Using Levinson's secure communication setup, she sent a carefully worded email to Dr. Elizabeth Cheen at Berkeley, requesting an urgent meeting regarding historical research into CIA psychological operations, specifically mentioning Desert Horizons and Blackbird. The response came within hours, a brief message agreeing to meet at a public location on campus the following day, with a cryptic postscript. "After 49 years, I wondered if anyone would ever find the truth. Be extremely careful." That evening, as Sarah prepared for the meeting, sorting through which documents to bring as proof, she discovered something she'd initially overlooked: a small notebook wedged in the lining of her laptop bag. It must have slipped in with the files she'd hastily gathered from the vault. The notebook was filled with her uncle's handwriting, more personal than the official reports. As she read through it, the full picture of Richard's involvement became clearer and more complex. He had joined the program as a true believer, a decorated Vietnam veteran recruited for his loyalty and psychological resilience. But as the experiments progressed, as he witnessed American citizens being drugged without consent, subjected to psychological tortures disguised as conditioning, his faith had eroded. The breaking point came in 1974 when a subject died during testing, a 26-year-old woman whose heart failed after repeated administrations of experimental compounds. The death was officially recorded as natural causes, but Richard's notes detailed the cover-up, including the disposal of her body and the fabrication of records showing she had checked out of the motel alive. After that incident, Richard began his clandestine documentation, collecting copies of files, recording conversations, photographing subjects and procedures, all while maintaining his cover as the dedicated site manager. When the church committee began investigating CIA abuses in 1975, he had considered coming forward, but the senior Blackbird officials made it clear that whistleblowers would not live to testify. So he waited, gathering more evidence, watching. As McCultra was partially exposed, but Blackbird remained hidden, protected by officials at the highest levels of government. When the official program was supposedly terminated in 1978, Desert Horizons was transitioned to a monitoring station, tracking former subjects for any manifestations of the conditioning protocols, including, Sarah realized with growing horror, her mother. The final pages of the notebook contained Richard's most personal confessions, his guilt over involving his half-sister unwittingly in the experiments, his despair when she discovered the truth and fled with her unborn child, his decades-long vigil maintaining the motel to protect the evidence while searching for a way to expose everything without signing his own death warrant. "I failed Carol," he had written in a shaky hand that suggested the entry was recent, "but perhaps I can still protect her daughter and granddaughter. The truth must survive, even if I don't." Sarah closed the notebook, tears streaming down her face. Her uncle, a man she had never known, had spent decades preserving evidence of horrors he had initially helped perpetrate, driven by guilt and a desperate hope for redemption. And now that burden had passed to her. "Are you sure you want To go through with this? Levinson asked as they finalized details for the meeting with Dr. Chun. Sarah looked up from Richard's notebook, her expression hardened by new resolve. More than ever. My mother spent her life running from this, first physically, then mentally as her dementia took hold. I won't run. I'm going to understand exactly what they did, and then I'm going to make sure they can never do it to anyone else. As night fell over the cabin, Sarah prepared herself for what lay ahead. The meeting with Dr. Chun represented her first offensive move in a game with rules. She was still learning and against adversaries who had been playing for decades. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just her safety and Emma's, but potentially the exposure of one of the darkest chapters in American intelligence history. The inheritance that had seemed like an inconvenience just days ago had transformed into a mission with profound personal implications. Whatever secrets Dr. Chun might reveal about Project Blackbird, Sarah was now committed to seeing this through, for her mother, for her uncle, for Emma, and for herself. As she carefully selected which documents to bring to the meeting, Sarah remembered her uncle's words from the recorded message. Your mother was right to run. Perhaps that had been true in 1979, but in 2023, with the resources and skills at her disposal, Sarah Mitchell wasn't running. She was preparing to confront the legacy of Desert Horizons Motel head-on, whatever the cost. The Berkeley campus hummed with ordinary academic life, students hurrying between classes, professors clutching coffee cups, tour groups snapping photos of the historic buildings. Amidst this mundane activity, Sarah Mitchell sat on a bench near the psychology building, a nondescript woman in business casual attire who could have been a visiting lecturer or a graduate student's parent. No one would have guessed she carried classified CIA documents in her messenger bag, or that she was preparing to confront a former government scientist about illegal human experimentation. Dr. Elizabeth Chen arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, just as they had arranged. Despite being in her 70s, she moved with the purposeful stride of someone half her age. Her silver hair was cut in a precise bob, her attire simple but elegant. She spotted Sarah immediately and approached without hesitation. Ms. Mitchell, she said, her voice soft but clear, I suggest we walk. Movement makes surveillance more difficult. Without waiting for a response, Dr. Chun set off along a tree-lined path that wound around the campus periphery. Sarah fell into step beside her. Your email mentioned Desert Horizons and Blackbird, Chun said after they had walked in silence for several minutes. Those are names I haven't heard spoken aloud in nearly 5 decades. How did you come across them? My uncle was Richard Mitchell, Sarah replied, watching Chun's face carefully. He left me the motel and everything in it when he died last month. Chun stopped abruptly, genuine shock breaking through her composed exterior. Richard is dead? I hadn't heard. You knew him? Sarah asked, surprised by the personal reaction. We worked together for 11 years, Chun confirmed, resuming their walk at a slower pace. He was complicated. Initially a true believer in the program, later something else entirely. She gave Sarah a penetrating look. How much do you know? Instead of answering directly, Sarah reached into her bag and withdrew a single document. Chun's resignation letter from 1975, marked classified and bearing her signature. I know that you left the program under protest after the death of a subject, Sarah said quietly. I know Blackbird was focused on prenatal and early childhood conditioning. And I know my mother was Subject 37A, exposed to experimental compounds. While pregnant with me, Chun's composure faltered again. She guided them to a secluded bench partly hidden by ornamental shrubs. I need to see what you have, she said, her professional detachment giving way to intensity. All of it, Sarah hesitated. How do I know I can trust you? You don't, Chun acknowledged. But consider this. I've spent 49 years waiting for someone to uncover what happened at Desert Horizons. I've lived with the knowledge, that I participated in something unconscionable, something that violated every ethical principle of my profession. That knowledge has shaped every decision I've made since walking away. She met Sarah's gaze directly. If I wanted to alert the people who ran Blackbird, I could have done so immediately after receiving your email. After a moment's consideration, Sarah opened her bag wider, revealing a selection of the files she'd brought. She examined them with the practiced efficiency of someone who had once known these documents intimately, her finger tracing along signatures and code names. "Richard preserved everything," she murmured, almost to herself, "just as he promised he would." "You knew he was collecting evidence?" Chun nodded. "After Jessica Winters died, the subject whose death prompted my resignation, Richard, approached me privately. He admitted he'd been documenting everything and planned to continue. He asked me to leave rather than become complicit in the cover-up." Her expression darkened. "He said he needed people on the outside who knew the truth in case something happened to him." "What exactly was Blackbird?" Sarah pressed. "The files describe experiments, but I don't fully understand what they were trying to achieve." Chun took a deep breath, looking around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Blackbird grew out of earlier Amacultra experiments, focused on mind control and behavior modification. But where those earlier programs used direct methods, drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation minus Blackbird explored whether psychological conditioning could be transferred genetically or implemented prenatally." "You mean they wanted to create people who were born pre-programmed?" Sarah asked, the implications making her skin crawl. "Essentially, yes. The theory was that certain compounds administered during pregnancy would make the developing brain more receptive to subliminal conditioning. Then, years later, specific triggers, sounds, phrases, images, could activate behavior patterns without the subject's awareness." Chun's voice had taken on a clinical tone, as if the scientific detachment helped her discuss the horrors. "The ultimate goal was to create assets who couldn't be detected because they didn't know they were assets. People who would respond to activation triggers without conscious knowledge they'd been programmed." Sarah felt physically ill. "And my mother was part of this?" "Carol Mitchell," Chun confirmed. "I remember her case specifically because she was one of the last subjects before I resigned. She stopped at Desert Horizons during a cross-country drive, just for one night. According to her intake forms, she was approximately 8 weeks pregnant, though she may not have known it yet." "What did they do to her?" Sarah forced herself to ask. "The standard Blackbird protocol, compounds administered through drinking, water and ventilation system, followed by subliminal audio during sleep. The initial exposure was designed to make the fetal brain receptive to further conditioning." Chun hesitated. "But your mother's case was different. She was flagged for the Monarch protocol variation." Sarah's pulse quickened. "That's mentioned repeatedly in the files, but I haven't found the details." "What was Monarch?" "The most ethically reprehensible aspect of the entire program," Chun said, her professional facade cracking to reveal genuine distress. "While standard Blackbird focused on creating generalized receptivity to later conditioning, Monarch attempted to implant specific response patterns prenatally: fight-or-flight triggers, information retention capabilities, enhanced pattern recognition. They believed certain psychological traits could be activated decades later with the right stimulus." The implications crashed over Sarah in waves. Her entire life, her aptitude for pattern recognition that had made her successful in digital security, her instantaneous fight-or-flight responses that friends had always commented on, even her photographic memory for data. Could these be results of manipulations performed before she was born? "How would you know if you'd been activated?" she asked, struggling to maintain composure. Chun studied her face carefully. "The activation would feel natural to you, like a normal response or decision, not an external influence." That was the insidious brilliance of the program. Unlike traditional brainwashing, There would be no sense of conflict or resistance. Your own mind would rationalize the program behavior as your autonomous choice. Sarah thought of the men who had confronted her at the motel. Could they activate these responses remotely? Make someone do something against their will? The original protocols required specific environmental conditions, particular sound frequencies, visual patterns, sometimes physical sensations like temperature changes, Chun explained. But the research was advancing rapidly before I left. They were experimenting with more subtle triggers, phrases embedded in casual conversation, visual cues that could be incorporated into everyday objects. A chill ran through Sarah despite the warm afternoon sun. Is there any way to know if I was affected, or if these effects could have been passed to my daughter? Chun's expression softened with genuine compassion. That's why I agreed to meet you. I've spent decades researching reversal methodologies, ways to identify and neutralize the conditioning techniques we developed. It became my life's work, though I never had access to actual subjects. You've been trying to undo what Blackbird did, Sarah realized. Attempting to, Chun corrected. Without access to the complete protocols or subjects, my work has been largely theoretical. But, with these files, she gestured to the documents, and with you, possibly the only second-generation subject I've ever encountered, we might finally understand the full scope of what was done and how to counter it. Sarah processed this information, weighing her options carefully. The men who came to the motel, they were ready to kill for these files. They'll be looking for me, for the documents. Involving you puts you at risk too. Chun straightened her shoulders, unexpected steel showing through her academic demeanor. I've lived with this guilt for 49 years, Ms. Mitchell. The opportunity to help undo some of the damage is worth any risk. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp beeping from Sarah's watch, the alarm she'd set to remind her of her daily check-in with Levinson to confirm her safety. I need to make a call, she explained, stepping away briefly to send a pre-arranged text message containing their code phrase, library research proceeding smoothly. When she returned, Chun was checking her own phone, her expression troubled. We should continue this conversation somewhere more secure. My campus office is monitored, standard university security, but still potentially vulnerable. I have a private research space off campus where we can review these files properly. As they walked toward the faculty parking lot, Sarah remained vigilant, scanning faces in the crowd, looking for the telltale signs of surveillance that her security work had taught her to recognize. So far, nothing seemed amiss, but she couldn't shake the feeling that finding Dr. Chun had been almost too easy. There's something I don't understand, Sarah said as they reached Chien's modest sedan. If Blackbird was so classified that they're still killing to protect it, how have you been able to conduct reversal research openly? Wouldn't they shut you down? Chun unlocked the car doors before responding. I disguised my research as theoretical cognitive psychology studies. My published work discusses hypothetical conditioning techniques without ever mentioning Blackbird. To the outside world, I'm just an eccentric professor with unusual research interests. She smiled thinly. Having been inside the program, I knew exactly how to stay beneath their radar. As they drove through Berkeley toward the hills beyond, Chun elaborated on her decades of carefully disguised research. After leaving the program, she had established herself in academic psychology, gradually building a reputation for ethical research practices, while secretly developing methodologies to identify and counteract the very techniques she had helped create. My greatest challenge was lack of data, she explained. Without access to actual subjects or complete protocol records, I could only hypothesize about the long-term effects. Your files could change everything, and you, as a living subject, represent an opportunity to finally test my reversal methodologies. They arrived at a modest house nestled among redwoods, its architecture designed to blend with the natural surroundings. Inside was a surprising contrast, one entire floor converted into a state-of-the-art research lab with neuroimaging equipment, computer workstations, and walls covered with complex diagrams of neural pathways. My private research facility, Chun explained, securing the door behind them. Funded through a foundation I established to study cognitive autonomy and influence resistance. The irony of using government research grants to develop countermeasures against government mind control programs has not been lost on me. For the next several hours, they meticulously reviewed the Blackbird files, with Chun explaining technical terms and contextualizing experimental protocols. The more Sarah learned, the more disturbing the picture became. Blackbird hadn't been merely unethical, it had been methodically sadistic, using unwitting American citizens as laboratory animals for techniques that violated every principle of human dignity. "This explains so much about my mother," Sarah said quietly as they examined Carol Mitchell's subject file. The paranoia that everyone thought was mental illness, her insistence on avoiding certain places, her extreme reactions to specific sounds. She wasn't delusional. She was responding to environmental triggers she didn't understand. Chin nodded grimly. Classic manifestation of subconscious conditioned responses. Her conscious mind wouldn't recognize the triggers, but her autonomic nervous system would react anyway. And my early onset dementia? Could that have been related? Sarah asked, thinking of her mother's rapid cognitive decline in her 50s. Chun hesitated. It's possible. Some of the compounds used had neurodegenerative effects in animal studies. We were instructed to ignore those findings in human applications. The clinical detachment in Chun's voice when discussing these horrors occasionally unsettled Sarah, reminding her that regardless of her subsequent redemptive work, this woman had once been part of the program that had experimented on her mother. "How could you participate in this?" Sarah finally asked directly. "You're a doctor, a scientist. How could you do this to innocent people?" Chun set down the file she'd been examining, her professional composure cracking to reveal profound shame. The same way good people throughout history have participated in atrocities, incrementally, with rationalization at each step. I was recruited from graduate school, told I would be developing therapeutic techniques for trauma patients. The classified nature was explained as necessary for national security. She removed her glasses, suddenly looking much older. By the time I realized what we were actually doing, I was already compartmentalized within the program. They showed us falsified ethics approvals, told us the subjects had given consent for advanced therapeutic interventions. When I began questioning procedures, they reminded me I'd signed the National Security Act and that prison awaited anyone who breached confidentiality. "But you eventually left," Sarah acknowledged. "After Jessica Winters died," Chun confirmed. "She was 26, a photographer traveling cross-country for a magazine assignment. During her third exposure session, her heart simply stopped. I was monitoring her vitals and watched it happen in real time. Her voice had dropped almost to a whisper. The program director ordered her body removed and records altered to show she had checked out normally. That night, Richard approached me, showed me evidence he'd been collecting. He said if I stayed, I would eventually become like them. The next day, I submitted my resignation. This glimpse of humanity, of moral awakening, softened Sarah's judgment somewhat. Chun had made unforgivable choices, but had spent half a century working to atone for them. As evening approached, they reached the most crucial file, the complete Monarch protocol that detailed the specific conditioning applied to Carol Mitchell and by extension to her unborn daughter. "This explains your exceptional pattern recognition abilities," Chun noted, reading through the technical specifications. The compounds were designed to enhance neural connectivity in regions associated with information processing. "But there's something else here." She turned the page, her expression growing troubled. "A fail-safe protocol incorporated into the Monarch subjects." "What kind of fail-safe?" Sarah asked, dread building. A self-termination response, Chun said gravely. Triggered by a specific phrase combined with a visual cue. If activated, it would compel the subject to remove themselves as a security risk. The implication was clear. Sarah had been pre-programmed with a suicide trigger, a kill switch that could be activated by someone who knew the proper combination. Can it be neutralized? Sarah asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Theoretically, yes. If we can identify the specific trigger sequence, I can design a counter-conditioning protocol. Chun was already making notes, fully in her element now that they were dealing with concrete neurological problems rather than ethical abstractions. We'll need to map your neural responses to potential trigger combinations. Sarah checked her. Watch nearly time for her next check-in with Levinson. I should call my contact first. Let them know I'll be staying here. As she stepped into the hallway to make the call, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The distinctive click of a gun being cocked, followed by Chun's voice, suddenly transformed from collaborative to commanding. That won't be necessary, Ms. Mitchell. Your check-in has already been handled. Sarah turned slowly to find Chun holding a small pistol with the practiced grip of someone familiar with firearms, not the academic she had presented herself as. Behind her stood one of the men from the motel, his expression coldly triumphant. You're working with them, Sarah said, the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. This whole time. Not exactly, Chun replied, her demeanor completely altered. I left the program, just as I told you. But I never stopped believing in its necessity. The techniques we developed were crucial for national security. Your uncle's misguided crusade threatened to destroy decades of valuable research and compromise ongoing operations. The man stepped forward. Dr. Chun contacted us immediately after your email. We've been monitoring your conversation since you arrived on campus. Sarah's mind raced, recalculating everything. Chun's eagerness to help, her convenient off-campus research facility, her detailed knowledge of the Blackbird protocols. It hadn't been the result of decades of redemptive research. She had remained connected to the program all along. What happens now? Sarah asked, playing for time while searching for any possible escape route. You'll be taken to a secure facility, Chun explained with clinical detachment. Your knowledge of Blackbird makes you a security risk, but your unique status as a second-generation subject makes you invaluable for ongoing research. And Emma? Sarah demanded, fear for her daughter overriding concern for herself. Your daughter will be located and brought into protective custody, the man replied smoothly. Her third-generation status presents unprecedented research possibilities. Sarah felt sick at the implication. Emma being subjected to the same kind of experimentation, treated as a research specimen rather than a human being. Everything she had learned about Blackbird, everything she had discovered about her own possible conditioning, crystallized into a single, overwhelming imperative. Emma must be protected at all costs. You'll never find her, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. She's completely off the grid with people you can't trace. Chun smiled thinly. We have resources you can't imagine, Ms. Mitchell. But there's an easier solution. She held up a small card with a pattern of colored shapes on one side. You're going to tell us exactly where Emma is. In fact, you're going to want to tell us. With growing horror, Sarah recognized what was happening. Chun was attempting to activate a conditioning trigger, to use the very programming Blackbird had implanted to turn Sarah against her own daughter. But in that moment of realization came another, more powerful understanding. Knowledge was protection. Unlike her mother, who had fled in terror without fully comprehending what had been done to her, Sarah now understood the mechanisms of her own potential conditioning. And with understanding came the possibility of resistance. Chun began to recite a series of seemingly random words while holding up the card, a passphrase designed to activate deeply buried programming. Sarah felt a momentary disorientation, a strange compulsion to respond with information about Emma's whereabouts. But armed with her new knowledge of how the triggers worked, she was able to recognize the artificial nature of the impulse. This wasn't her autonomous decision. This was external manipulation attempting to override her will. With that recognition came the power to resist. Subject appears resistant to initial trigger sequence, Chun noted clinically, watching Sarah's face for reactions. Implementing secondary protocol. The man stepped forward, producing a small device that emitted a low-frequency hum just at the edge of Sarah's hearing range. The sound created an immediate feeling of nausea and disorientation, clearly designed to weaken her mental defenses against the conditioning. But Sarah had one advantage they couldn't have anticipated. Her lifetime of working with digital security systems had trained her to recognize and counteract influence techniques. Just as she helped clients protect their systems against social engineering attacks, she now turned those same analytical skills inward, recognizing the manipulation attempt for what it was. Remarkable, Chun murmured, noticing Sarah's continued resistance. The second-generation conditioning appears to have developed unexpected resilience. She adjusted the settings on the device, increase amplitude by 30%. The discomfort intensified, but Sarah remained focused on a single thought: Emma, not as a location to be revealed, but as her anchor to her authentic self. She visualized her daughter's face, recalled the weight of infant Emma in her arms, remembered teaching her to ride a bike, genuine memories that belonged to her alone, untainted by any external programming. "This is taking too long," the man said impatiently. "We need to move her before the missed check-in alerts her contacts." Chun frowned. "The resistance is unexpected. We may need to employ chemical assistance." As they briefly conferred, Sarah assessed her situation with cold precision. The hallway offered no immediate escape route. Chun stood between her and the front door, while the man blocked access to the research area. The windows were likely reinforced. Chun's research facility had undoubtedly been designed with security in mind. Then Sarah spotted something on Chun's desk, her own phone, left there when they had begun reviewing the files. If she could reach it, trigger the emergency protocol she'd established with Levinson. "Prepare the sedative," Chun instructed the man, who reached into his jacket pocket. In that moment of divided attention, Sarah made her move. She lunged toward the desk, surprising both captors with her sudden action. Her fingers closed around the phone just as Chun grabbed her arm, the gun now pressed against her ribs. "That was unwise," Chun said coldly. "The programming should have prevented direct resistance." "You miscalculated," Sarah replied, her thumb finding the emergency button on her phone. 3 rapid taps that would send her location and a distress signal to Levinson. "You assumed I wouldn't understand what was happening to me." The man seized the phone, but too late. The confirmation vibration against her thumb told Sarah the signal had been sent. "What did you just do?" he demanded, checking the screen. "Insurance," Sarah answered, a calm settling over her despite the gun still pressed to her side. "You're not the only ones who can set up fail-safes." Chun's expression hardened. "It doesn't matter. By the time anyone could respond, you'll be long gone from here. The sedative will ensure your cooperation." As the man prepared the syringe, a notification chimed on the computer behind them, an incoming email marked urgent. Chun glanced at it, momentarily distracted, and Sarah saw her expression change from confidence to concern. "Someone's accessing the Blackbird files remotely," Chun said sharply. "Multiple server locations simultaneously." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "That would be my dead man switch. When I miss 2 consecutive check-ins, the encrypted files automatically unlock on servers in 5 different countries. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence my uncle collected, all being released to journalists," human rights organizations, and congressional oversight committees as we speak. The bluff she'd told the men at the motel was no longer a bluff. Levinson had helped her implement exactly such a system, designed to activate if she failed to check in. What her captors didn't know was that the system required 2 missed check-ins. Not 1. She still had time before the files would actually be released. "You're lying," the man said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Check the servers," Sarah challenged. "See for yourself." As Chun hurried to the computer, frantically typing commands to verify Sarah's claim, the balance of power in the room subtly shifted. Even with the gun, they were now responding to her actions rather than controlling the situation. "Multiple access attempts confirmed," Chun reported grimly. "Singapore, Zurich, Toronto servers all show authentication protocols initiating." The man's expression darkened. "Shut it down." "I can't," Chun replied, genuine alarm breaking through her clinical detachment. "The authentication is proceeding through one-way protocols. Even with the right credentials, there's no remote termination." "Option. Only I can stop it," Sarah stated firmly. "With a specific cancellation code that has to be entered in person at a secure terminal, a terminal that isn't here." It was another calculated bluff, but one based on enough truth to be credible. The actual failsafe required a specific text message from her phone, but they had no way of knowing that. The man grabbed her roughly. "Tell us how to stop it." "Not until Emma's safety is guaranteed," Sarah countered, maintaining eye contact despite her racing heart. "I want direct confirmation that she will remain untouched, completely outside your program. And I want it in writing, signed by whoever actually runs Blackbird now." Chun and the man exchanged glances, a silent calculation passing between them. The threat of worldwide exposure clearly outweighed the research potential of one test subject. "We would need authorization from Director Kelly," Chun said finally. "He's the only one who can make that guarantee." "Then get him on the phone," Sarah demanded. "Now." As Chun made the call, using a secure line that required multiple authentication steps, Sarah's mind worked furiously to extend her advantage. The emergency signal to Levinson would bring help, but not quickly enough. She needed to keep them talking, keep them focused on the imaginary file release rather than sedating and transporting her. "Director Kelly is being contacted," Chun reported, covering the mouthpiece. "But he'll want verification that you can actually stop the file release. Once I have his guarantee about Emma, signed and witnessed, I'll provide instructions to terminate the process." Sarah replied with a confidence she didn't entirely feel, "But the window is limited. The longer we debate, the closer those files get to public release." The psychological pressure was working. Both captors showed increasing signs of stress, the man repeatedly checking the time while Chun monitored the computer for any updates on the supposed file release. Finally, Chun handed Sarah the phone. "Director Kelly will speak with you directly." The voice on the line was calm, authoritative, and chillingly remorseless, the voice of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions without moral hesitation. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand. You've created quite a situation. I'm prepared to provide written assurance regarding your daughter's exemption from any government program, but I need confirmation that you can and will terminate the document release immediately." "I need more than assurances about Emma," Sarah replied, thinking quickly. "I want immunity for myself, permanent surveillance termination for both of us, and relocation assistance with new identities." "That's not how this works," Kelly responded coldly. "You're not in a position to make demands." "I'm the only one who can stop those files from going public," Sarah countered. "In approximately 40 minutes, everything about Blackbird becomes global news. The choice is simple. Give me and my daughter our lives back, or explain to the president why experiments conducted on American citizens without consent are making headlines worldwide." The silence that followed told Sarah she had struck the right chord. When Kelly spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. I can authorize immunity and relocation. Surveillance termination would require additional approvals. Then get them. Sarah insisted. I'm not stopping anything without complete assurance of our safety. As the negotiation continued, Sarah noticed something through the window, a flash of movement in the tree line bordering Chun's property, then another, more deliberate this time. Someone was approaching the house under cover of the surrounding forest. Keeping her expression neutral, Sarah focused on extending the conversation with Kelly, requesting specific guarantees and clarifications while watching the peripheral movement outside. Chun remained fixated on the computer, monitoring for signs of the impending file release, while the man divided his attention between Sarah and the ongoing phone call. Neither of them noticed when a small cylindrical object was tossed through the partially open window of the adjacent room. Sarah did. I'll need these guarantees delivered here in person, she was saying to Kelly when the flashbang grenade detonated. The explosion of light and sound was disorienting, even though Sarah had anticipated it. Chun and the man were completely unprepared. Chun dropped the phone and covered her ears, while the man staggered against the wall, momentarily blinded. In the chaos that followed, the front door burst open and 3 figures in tactical gear stormed in. Sarah recognized Levinson among them, alongside 2 individuals whose military precision marked them as professionals. Down on the ground, weapons down. One of them shouted as the other quickly disarmed Chun and the man. Levinson rushed to Sarah. Are you hurt? I'm fine, she assured him, the relief making her knees weak. How did you find me? Your emergency signal included GPS coordinates, he explained, helping her to a chair. I activated my contingency plan, friends who owe me favors from my NSA days. The tactical team efficiently secured Chun and the man, using zip ties to restrain them while conducting a sweep of the remaining rooms to ensure no other threats were present. Perfect timing, Sarah said, glancing at her watch. Another 10 minutes and I might have run out of things to negotiate for. Your bluff about the files was inspired, Levinson noted. Watching them panic about an imminent global release while the actual deadman switch was still hours from activation. Sarah's expression turned serious. It's not a bluff anymore. We need to release everything, all of it immediately. They know about Emma, and they won't stop looking for her. Levinson nodded grimly. I anticipated you might decide that. Everything's prepared, 1 confirmation code, and it all goes public. Sarah hesitated only briefly before making the decision. Do it. Release everything except the specific details about me and Emma. Those stay protected. As Levinson used his secure phone to initiate the actual file release, Sarah approached their captives. Chun glared up at her with a mixture of professional frustration and grudging respect. You've just compromised 50 years of national security. Work, Chun said bitterly. No, Sarah corrected her. I've exposed 50 years of illegal human experimentation conducted against American citizens without their knowledge or consent. There's a difference. The man remained silent, his training evidently including protocols for capture situations. But Chun was still operating under the conviction that her work had been justified. The techniques we developed saved lives. She insisted, prevented attacks, secured American interests worldwide. At what cost? Sarah challenged. How many Jessica Winters died for your greater good? How many lives were destroyed? How many people like my mother spent their lives running from something they didn't understand? Chun had no answer for that. Within the hour, news alerts began appearing on Levinson's secure phone. The first journalists were beginning to review the Blackbird files. By morning, the story would be global, the decades-long conspiracy exposed to public scrutiny. What happens now? Sarah asked as they prepared to leave, the tactical team having secured Chun and the man for transport to a secure location. where they would be held until federal authorities could be properly briefed. Now we implement the second phase of the contingency plan, Levinson explained. My contacts have arranged secure transport to reunite you with Emma. From there, you'll both be moved to a safe location until the full implications of the file release can be assessed. And after that? Sarah pressed, suddenly uncertain about the future she had created with her decision to expose everything. Levinson's expression softened. After that, you rebuild. On your terms, not theirs. The truth about Blackbird will create shockwaves through the intelligence community, congressional investigations, probably criminal proceedings against those responsible. But it also creates space for healing, for you, for other victims who never knew why they experienced certain symptoms or compulsions. As they drove away from Chun's property, Sarah found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a reluctant inheritance just days earlier. The abandoned motel that had seemed like an inconvenience had instead become the catalyst for exposing one of the darkest chapters in American intelligence history. More personally, it had given her something she hadn't realized she needed: understanding. The patterns in her own psychology, the inexplicable talents and tendencies that had shaped her life, even her mother's descent into paranoia and eventual dementia, all of it now had context, explanation, meaning. 3 days later, Sarah sat on the deck of a lakeside cabin in northern Michigan, watching Emma skip stones across the still water. Their reunion had been emotional: tears, hugs, promises never to separate again. Now they were settling into a strange new normal, waiting for the full impact of the Blackbird revelations to unfold across the national consciousness. Are we ever going back home? Emma asked, returning to sit beside her mother. Not to our old home, Sarah admitted, but we'll create a new one. Somewhere we can start fresh. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this with the remarkable resilience of youth. Because of what they did to Grandma, and to you? Sarah had explained. Everything in age-appropriate terms. The experiments, the conditioning, the decades-long cover-up. Emma deserved to understand why their lives had been upended, even if the full horror of Blackbird would wait until she was older. Partly, Sarah acknowledged, but also because we have an opportunity now to help others who were affected. The files your great-uncle preserved have identified hundreds of other subjects across multiple generations. Many of them still don't know what was done to them. The revelation had created a sense of purpose that transcended Sarah's initial focus on protection and escape. With Blackbird exposed, with congressional hearings already being scheduled and Justice Department investigations launching, the next crucial step was helping those who had been victimized, people like her mother, who had lived and died without understanding why certain patterns dominated their lives. I think that's why Uncle Richard left you the motel, Emma observed with the startling insight she occasionally displayed. He knew you'd understand the files because of your security work, but also because you'd care about helping the people who were hurt. Sarah smiled, struck by her daughter's perception. I think you're right. He couldn't expose everything himself. They were watching him too closely. But he prepared everything so that when the time came, someone else could finish what he started. As evening approached, Sarah received a secure call from Levinson with updates on the national response to the Blackbird revelations. The story had exploded across media platforms worldwide, with initial government denials quickly giving way to promises of full investigations as the overwhelming evidence made continued denial untenable. Director Kelly has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, Levinson reported. Chun and her associate are in federal custody. Several former officials have already been served with subpoenas, and there's talk of a special congressional committee being formed. And the other subjects? Sarah asked, her primary concern now shifting to those who, like her mother, had been unwitting participants in the program. That's the most promising development, Levinson said, his tone lightening. The Justice Department has established a task force specifically to identify and contact all living subjects or their descendants. They're bringing in trauma specialists, psychologists, medical experts, creating a comprehensive support system. After the call, Sarah joined Emma by the lake's edge for their evening ritual of watching the sunset reflect across the water. The peace of the natural setting contrasted sharply with the turbulence of recent days, offering a reminder that healing was possible, that new beginnings could emerge from even the darkest revelations. "Do you think we'll ever go back to the motel?" Emma asked unexpectedly, to see where it all happened. Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. "Maybe someday. Not right away, but eventually. It's part of our history now, for better or worse." In truth, Sarah had been thinking about Desert Horizons, not as the site of horror it had been, but as something it could become. Perhaps when the investigations were complete and justice had been served, the remote motel could be transformed into a memorial and education center, a place where the story of Blackbird could be told, where the importance of ethical boundaries in government research could be emphasized for future generations. The inheritance that had initially seemed like a burden had transformed into something far more meaningful, a legacy of truth that, however painful, offered the possibility of healing for hundreds of families who had been affected by blackbirds. Reach. Richard Mitchell had preserved the evidence not just to expose wrongdoing, but to create the possibility of restoration. As darkness fell over the lake, Sarah put her arm around Emma's shoulders, drawing strength from the simple human connection that no government program could override or control. Whatever conditioning might exist within her own neural pathways, whatever triggers might have been implanted before her birth, the love she felt for her daughter was authentically hers, a truth more powerful than any programming. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be testimony to give, medical evaluations to undergo, a new life to construct away from the identities they had known. But for the first time since discovering the vault beneath the Desert Horizons Motel, Sarah felt something beyond fear and determination. She felt hope. The hidden vault that had preserved evidence of humanity's darkest capabilities had also, paradoxically, created the opportunity for its noblest response: accountability, justice, healing. The secret room that changed everything had indeed transformed their lives, but not in the way those who created Blackbird could ever have anticipated. It had transformed darkness into light, secrecy into truth, isolation into community. And in doing so, it had converted an inheritance of horror into a legacy of healing, not just for Sarah and Emma, but for all those whose lives had been shadowed by operations conducted in the hidden rooms of remote desert motels, now finally exposed to the cleansing power of sunlight and truth. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.